No, we are not talking about cannibals and writing. We are going to talk about writing that eats itself. I guess it's not much better.
Listen to me when I say they will never go away. Run. Welcome to the jungle.
So if you haven't heard of this term before and it's completely new to you, that's totally fine. I heard it loosely used by one of my favorite YouTubers. I can't even remember which one it was. Mostly because the movie industry today keeps remaking and rehashing its own ideas, which granted is nothing new. I mean, they've been doing that forever. But lately, they're putting a new spin on it. And by a new spin, I mean they're literally taking the original and taking characters and circumstances from the original and destroying it in order to make a new one. I think one of the most obvious examples that come to mind when we think of remakes and rewritings is the Disney company and how they keep taking their Oscar-nominated and Oscar-winning movies from the 90s, 80s, and beyond and remake them into these grotesque versions of what these glorious masterpieces used to be. I believe while some of them fall more along the lines of just a remaking or a rewriting, some of them tend to take details and take important elements of the story and completely eradicate them, erase them, or replace them. And the replacement part is what we really want to talk about today. If you're an avid reader or writer, or even if you've walked into Barnes & Noble lately, I'm sure that you've seen the multiple fairy tale remakes, the twisted fairy tales, the twisted Greek mythological stories. And honestly, I'm not going to sit here and say that I haven't enjoyed them. I love Land of Stories. And granted, while I prefer most of the modern remakes of fairy tales that are a little more subtle and on the nose than just in your face, I mean, even some of the rewritten erotica stories are entertaining. But the thing that always gets me is when these new writers seem to take the story and sit down with it like,
I can rewrite this, but I can rewrite it better.
Instead of approaching it with a little more respect to the original, we have writers that seem to want to fix these problems. We have writers that seem to want to completely eradicate their predecessors in order to stand out as the better version. We see this happen in Charlie's Angels, how they had to make Bosley, the renowned Bosley of the previous Charlie Angels, the bad guy. We see this in the opening scene of Terminator Dark Fate. They kill off the main character from Terminator 2, which is one of the biggest sci-fi movies that was ever released.
Just can't go around killing people.
Why?
What do you mean why? 'Cause you can't.
Why?
We see them completely eradicate that entire story with one clip. Another good example would be the new Star Wars trilogy, which I did see and it was garbage.
When I read 7, I said, I love everybody's part except mine. And on this one, it was similar in the sense that I said to Ryan, I'm so surprised how you see Luke.
It did receive some criticism online, social media, even in the Star Wars community a little bit.
That. Criticism online? It's unheard of.
When you make edgy, bold decisions like you did in this movie, how worried are you that you might also piss off people that are...
Can I just say, though, a lot of times I would say to Ryan, we got to think about the fans. Yeah. And he said, no, we got to think about the story and we got to think about our movie, which
I feel the good in you.
I know firsthand that how passionate Star Wars fans are. I know that every Star Wars fan has a list of stuff they want and don't want from all of these movies, and nothing's going to line up with that. But that's not to poo-poo that. And even hatred from the fans comes from a place of deeply caring about it and of passion. And so I'm never going to dismiss that. And
No.
so I'm never going to dismiss that.
I've seen this raw strength only once before. It didn't scare me enough then. It does now.
Where the fuck is Ben?
Ray Skywalker.
Somebody's already leaving. Somebody's already bailed. I fucking hate Star Wars! And everybody's unhappy. I want my fucking money back!
You might remember the Game of Thrones fiasco that happened a couple of years ago. The fandom was absolutely furious with how they treated the characters, with how they treated the plot. The story fell so flat that the fandom felt like they had just been completely betrayed.
Best season ever!
And I feel like a lot of movies today are reliant on the pandering as far as the rewrites and remakes. Not always because the stories were so problematic to begin with, but I think a lot of it is pandering because we're seeing that the movie industry kind of feeds off of that nostalgia that we have for all the movies that we used to love. And we're always curious to see how they're going to take this, how they're going to rework it and remake it to fit modern criteria and modern time. I stopped watching it after Disney's remakes just because they were literally copy and paste without the emotion, without the appreciation and the respect of the original. Now, I'm sure you are aware of Disney's Mulan and how well that one worked out. It's because they completely eradicated who Mulan was. Mulan was a complete rewrite. It was a complete remaking and it still didn't work. From what I've learned, the 90s version of Mulan is a lot closer to the original legend of Mulan than the modern remake. Mulan was allowed to be herself. She was allowed to be human. And as I stated in my last video, it is very, very important to make your characters human, or at least have human qualities that the audience can kind of relate to at some point or another. Instead of giving her those trials, instead of giving her that conflict that we needed in order to become that role model that she once was for little girls like myself. I loved Mulan as a kid for that exact reason. We see her pull out superpowers from her ass and just skate through these scenarios and skate through these circumstances. And I think the simple difference between rewriting something and cannibalizing something completely relies on the level of respect that a writer has for the original work. Whether they find it problematic or not, writers are going to make mistakes. Times change, times evolve, people evolve, things are different. Society is completely different than it was 20, 30 years ago. Taking something from 20 to 30 years ago and squeezing it in a copy and paste merely to patch up the problems that critics have since pointed out throughout a movie or throughout a series is not a respectful way of rewriting something. There are a lot of different ways that you can form your characters, and there's a lot of different ways to be able to rewrite a story to expand upon these characters. What you do not want to do is completely disrespect the predecessor and disrespect where the original story came from and the original writer to begin with, because you are taking their ideas. If society hadn't grown from their stories and hadn't been formed from the stories, you wouldn't be able to point out those faults and those misleadings and plot devices to begin with. They helped form you, and they helped form society, and they helped form literary and film culture to get to this point where we're able to recognize problems and these certain themes and subtext within a story. So all I could say is if you're planning on rewriting a fairy tale, if you're planning on rewriting a story, keep the original in mind. Remember where we came from, where you came from to get to the point that you're at. And if you find a few problematic things in a story, you should really decide whether or not that's worth a complete reworking and a complete rewriting, or if there's something else that you can give it, something that's your flair, that's your personality, that can expand upon the story instead of fix it. I think that's all that I have for this video. If you like this video, like it. If you disliked it, fine, whatever. Leave a comment below, let me know what you think of the modern remakes and rewritings, and whether or not you think this cannibalistic writing is influencing the film and literary industry as much as I do. I'll see you guys in my next video.
Welcome to the jungle.